Welcome to Wisely. Do not visit these 10 islands and tribes. Stay till the end. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. We're about to zoom across oceans, jungles to places that are legally off limits, ecologically fragile, dangerously inhospitable. This video isn't about sensationalism. It's about respect, safety, reasons scientists say do not approach. I'll show you each place on a map, explain the laws, explain the science, share the human stories. Some spots are deadly because of wildlife or storms. Others house uncontacted people who would be devastated by outside disease. On the inset map, you can see North Sentinel Island sitting in the Andaman Sea, part of the Bay of Bengal. Tiny, ringed by reef, and isolated by hundreds of miles of open water. The Sentinelese are one of the world's most isolated peoples. Their history of resisting outsiders is well documented. Contact attempts in the past have resulted in violent confrontations and, tragically, deaths. Governments now treat the island as off-limits for very specific safety and ethical reasons. The danger is twofold. The Sentinelese have defended their home fiercely, and they also lack immunity to common infectious diseases. Anthropologists and regional authorities warn that even a single sick visitor could trigger catastrophic outbreaks among the islanders. That's why the Indian government enforces strict exclusion zones. Approaching by boat is illegal and actively prevented. Approaching by air is illegal and actively prevented. Look at the regulatory map overlays. Clear no-approach buffers enforced by patrols, not because officials want to be secretive, but because the alternative is preventable tragedy. Treat this place as untouchable. It's both a human rights issue and a public health directive. There's nothing heroic about ignoring those rules. It's simply reckless and potentially fatal. Off the coast of São Paulo, Brazil, sits Ilha da Queimada Grande, commonly known as Snake Island. On the map, it's a short but dangerous distance from the mainland, surrounded by steep cliffs and rough seas that already make landings difficult. What really sets this island apart are the golden lancehead pit vipers, an incredibly venomous species found almost nowhere else. The Brazilian Navy strictly restricts access. The island is legally off-limits to the public, and for good reason. The snakes are both dangerously concentrated and ecologically important. They evolved in isolation and play a role in a fragile island ecosystem. Beyond personal safety, scientists worry that casual visits could harm the snake population or introduce invasive species that would upset the balance. Maps show that any approach requires specialized boats and permission, which the government rarely grants. If you love wildlife, respect strict protections instead of trying to get a closer look. Conservation rules exist to preserve lives and biodiversity, and the penalties and risks for illegal landings are severe. Tristan da Cunha sits almost in the middle of the South Atlantic. The map makes that isolation obvious, hundreds of miles from major ports. A single volcanic island forming a tiny human community. It's home to one of the most remote permanent settlements on Earth. A place where supply ships come rarely, and self-reliance is woven into daily life. Medical evacuations can take days or weeks. Weather can cut communities off at a moment's notice. The islanders have developed local rules for who they welcome and how outside visitors are managed. Casual tourist landings would strain local resources and could put both visitors and residents at risk. Maps, travel logs show strict entry processes and community-led guidelines. The right approach is permission, planning, respect. If you want to engage with remote communities, do so through official channels that prioritize their consent, health, and autonomy. This is about being welcome, not forcing your way in. Surtsey appeared suddenly in 1963 during a volcanic eruption off Iceland, and on maps it's a tiny dot near the island chain. For decades, it has been strictly off-limits to the public. Every footstep could alter long-term scientific observations, and even a small introduction of seeds, microbes, insects would change the island's developmental trajectory. Scientists visit with permits, boots sterilized, protocols to minimize contamination. The rules are exacting because the island functions as a unique natural experiment. Maps show Surtsey as a protected reserve and access is controlled for a reason. It's one of the world's most valuable field sites for ecology. Tawdry curiosity or thrill-seeking visits would destroy decades of data and rob future generations of invaluable knowledge. Respect scientific stewardship and stay away. Zoom out across the Andaman archipelago on the map. You'll see a pattern of exclusion zones, protected areas around multiple islands. This region is home to several isolated tribes, not just the Sentinelese. Authorities have established legal buffers to prevent contact. Those maps are literal lines drawn to save lives, both theirs and ours. Governments and NGOs emphasize disease risk. Isolated groups have no immunity to common pathogens. A single exposure could be devastating. Beyond health, there are ethical obligations to respect self-determination. The map overlays show patrol routes, restricted landing areas, legal penalties for approach. If you're tempted to get closer for photos or fame, remember the consequences. Criminal sanctions, irreversible harm to vulnerable peoples, moral responsibility. These zones exist because history taught us harsh lessons. The rule is simple. Observe protections, support indigenous rights from a distance, never attempt contact. On a city map, North Brother Island sits in the East River near New York City, deceptively close to a major metropolis, but its history gives us a cautionary example. Once home to quarantine hospitals, later abandoned, it's been off-limits for safety and preservation reasons. The island's structures are decaying. The hazard isn't myth. Collapsing buildings, unstable terrain, legal restrictions keep the public away. Authorities maintain the closure to prevent injuries and to preserve historical and environmental integrity. Useful urban contrast to remote islands. Proximity doesn't equal safety. If a place is closed to visitors, public health reasons, structural danger, respect the closure. Trespassing can harm you and damage heritage that belongs to the public. Socotra appears as an isolated jewel on maps off Yemen's coast. The landscape is unlike anywhere else. Bizarre dragon's blood trees, endemic plants, species found nowhere else on Earth. That uniqueness makes the island ecologically fragile and highly susceptible to disturbance. Unregulated tourism, development, introduced species could rapidly degrade these ecosystems. Responsible visitation is possible, but requires strict controls, permits, guides who understand local ecology, limits on where people can go. Maps of conservation zones show the areas most sensitive to human impact. Respecting Socotra means recognizing global responsibility for biodiversity hotspots. Admiration from afar is good, but if you travel, do so through certified programs that prioritize preservation and local livelihoods. Don't be the person who turns a wonder into a casualty. Sable Island sits down by Nova Scotia on maritime charts and looks like a soft crescent of sand. But that soft surface hides a sensitive ecosystem. The island is famous for wild horses and shifting dunes. Authorities tightly control access to protect wildlife and fragile habitats. Landing there threatens breeding grounds and disrupts dune dynamics that take decades to form. There are fines, enforcement for unauthorized visits, and biosecurity rules to stop invasive species from hitching ashore. Even boat approaches are regulated. Maps show protected boundaries, designated research areas. If you love the horses, support conservation rather than attempting an illegal landing. Observing from sanctioned platforms and funding preservation efforts are the responsible ways to engage with Sable's wild beauty. On maps of the Amazon along the Brazil-Peru border, you'll notice large shaded exclusion zones. These are areas recognized by governments and indigenous agencies as home to uncontacted groups. These territories are intentionally left alone to protect the autonomy and health of peoples who have chosen isolation. The risks mirror those we've seen elsewhere: extreme disease vulnerability, cultural destruction, legal penalties for breach. Authorities emphasize non-contact. NGOs emphasize non-contact. International law emphasizes non-contact. The maps aren't arbitrary. They represent refuge and legal sanctuary drawn to minimize outside intrusion. If you're ever tempted by the myth of discovering a lost tribe, stop. Respect means advocacy, not invasion. Support policies and organizations that protect land rights and provide remote, culturally sensitive aid when invited, but never seek out contact or map coordinates for travel or publicity. We've just mapped 10 places that share one clear message. Some parts of our world are off limits for good reasons. Whether it's legal protection, devastating disease risk, dangerous wildlife, or fragile ecosystems, the maps and rules are meant to preserve lives, cultures, and science. Please take these warnings seriously. Curiosity is natural, but curiosity should never become harm. If this video changed how you think about travel and exploration, tell us. Support conservation groups, follow local laws, and push for policies that protect indigenous rights in endangered places. The right way to appreciate these spots is from a distance, through education, ethical advocacy, and by amplifying the voices of those who are authorized to speak for them. Thanks for watching Wisely. If you found this useful, please like, comment, and subscribe. Tell us in the comments which place surprised you or what you'd like mapped next. We read every suggestion.